So welcome everybody. Also it's kind of early in the morning for the Berlin Standard, so I'm really happy to see many people here. And so I briefly introduce this event, Post-Digital Research, that come from a collaboration that we have been having with Aarhus University now since 3 years, when we started in 2011 to create a workshop, a PhD workshop at the University of the Art here in Berlin. And the idea has been really to bring a research agenda into the festival. And I think that today is really packed, this room. I'm really happy about that. Maybe we can say that we are starting to succeed in this objective. And so I think that I will introduce briefly Christian Ulrik Andersen from Aarhus University that will also explain you better the modality in which we have been working. And this event is also the occasion to launch for the third time a peer-reviewed newspaper that we have been doing together in collaboration between the resource Transmedial Culture, Transmediale and Aarhus University, as a newspaper that you can find also everywhere in the house and will be further developed and presented in this context. And just I briefly say who is Christian, since he is going to host the event, but there are much more, and also a lot of other researchers that will be with us today. So Christian will also introduce them in different groups. So Christian is working at Aarhus University as associate professor in digital aesthetic and culture, and especially many of the people coming from Aarhus University are part of the participatory IT research center of the Department of the Arts and Communication. And Christian has been working for many years on the topics of game, city and business platforms, and also together with Soren Polt is the author of the book Interface Criticism. So now I leave the word to him, that is going to introduce this new brand peer review newspaper, and enjoy the morning.
Thank you, Tatjana. Yeah, I'll begin by explaining a little bit about the background, as Tatjana encouraged me to do. So this panel is the outcome of a peer process. I don't know, maybe we should turn this on. Can we swap to the other computer? Yeah. Thanks. Looks a bit funny, but okay. It's the outcome of a peer process. In August 2013, last year, a number of researchers responded to an open call to participate in this workshop. And this is what we're here to present today. And I also like to begin by thanking Tatjana and the whole Transmediale crew, Filippo, Janetta, and Markus Huber, and not least also Christopher Gansing, who also came to Aarhus to participate in the workshop. The call, I'll just read a little bit from the call, just to give you an idea of what people were working with. So I'm reading out. We're witnessing fundamental changes. Not only do we no longer distinguish between online and offline, or analog and digital, the medium of digital technology also seems to hold less fascination. It has become embedded in almost every contemporary aesthetic practice. In this, our focus of attention somewhat shifts. We become interested in the mechanisms of commercialization, for instance, how Amazon, Google, Apple, etc., influence the way we read, write, draw, perceive, etc. And also in the renewed significance of the technologies we left behind, the role of print, magnetic tapes, floppy disks, and so on. At the workshop, artists and researchers from various fields and backgrounds explore theories and practices relating to the post-digital. So the purpose of these seminars is to explore the festival theme, but it is also to build a research network and open it up to emerging researchers. So we further aim to also include practice-based research as well as critical theory. In advance of meeting, each participant prepared a text addressing the call, the notion of the post-digital, posted it online, and commented on each other's contributions. The group then met in Aarhus at Kunsthal Aarhus in October, where they, in an ongoing peer review process, presented, critiqued, and further developed their writings. As part of a 3-day sprint, the group then decided to rewrite their contributions using a set of constraints based on a common vocabulary. In short, all participants came up with a definition, and from this we ran a script that analyzed the common vocabulary. I'll explain this more in detail in a minute. Over the course of 3 days, all articles were rewritten and made more concise using this vocabulary. And in addition, we also developed scripts to analyze the images. James did this, and this is what you see up here in the background. So all this is what you find in this publication here. That you see here. I'll also like to use this occasion to thank Manuel Bürger and Tim Hanneke, who are here, who did the design, and they did a very nice job. We're very pleased with it. Whereas the two previous issues I've got, or the 3 previous issues, I'll just show them. Maybe some of you have seen these. This is one from 2 years ago. It's quite different, the more sort of newspaper style. Manuel also did this. And there's also one on researching BWPWAP. These issues reflected directly on the thematic framework of the festival. So this issue is a little different, as it's sort of an interpretation of the festival's artistic call. We have chosen to focus on the post-digital as well as on the effects of the digital realm of research practices, research outcomes, research culture, etc. So somewhat jokingly, we have also referred to this as an afterglow of research in the workshop. So just to explain a little bit more about the concept of the newspaper and how it has been conceived. So all participants in the workshop obviously had their own interpretation of what the post-digital meant. And I think, if we asked in this audience, we have heard this notion many times, but probably each of you associate something differently with this concept. So out of this, each participant wrote a 100-word definition. And from this was analyzed, and we kind of wanted to realize what was the common vocabulary. What did we have in common? What did the post-digital mean? So we came up with a vocabulary of the most common used words, and also a list of taboo words, words that were kind of individual, only my conception of the post-digital. So we were encouraged not to use those words. So we rewrote all the articles and put them in the newspaper, and then analyzed the text to produce a list of vocabularies that you also find in there, and also a score. How well did each of us adapt to this notion of the post-digital? You also see that on the front page of the newspaper. So obviously, people had to adapt a lot, some more than others, to this vocabulary, but we also gave people the opportunity to further develop their writings, and for our journal, a peer-reviewed journal about, it's the acronym aprja.net, where they can sort of, where they have or will publish very soon lengthier articles that are sort of more sort of, you could say traditional in that sense. So this is available in a few weeks, and so you can stay tuned online. We'll promote it. So after this brief introduction to the concept, I'd like to address the agenda a little. So the post-digital is a term that sucks, but is useful. Florian wrote in his paper, and this is what we're going to follow in the next 2 hours or so. through 3 roundtables. Obviously, we are a lot of people. This is a collaborative effort, so we all want to be represented here. So it's going to be a bit of a madness with all these changes. I hope you sort of adapt to this. But we're going to follow it through 3 roundtables, where the first one will address the notion of the post-digital, just before we perhaps saw the definition up there, that the sort of the common definition that we developed through the workshop. But it's also in the newspaper, if you in the centerfold. So we'll discuss, follow its genealogy and what it means, and I think also why it sucks, why it may sucks. For this discussion, we have here Jeff Cox, Alessandro Ludovico, Annette Decker, Florian Kramer, and Eric Snodgrass. Secondly, in the following 2 roundtables, we'll explore why it potentially may be useful in different areas of research that deal with contemporary digital aesthetics and culture. And these areas include art, aesthetic theory, acoustics, political economy, and philosophy in the second roundtable. And then in this roundtable we have, you come on stage later, we have Josephine Bosma, Boratia, Chattopadhyay, I'm not sure I pronounce your name right, and Georgios Papadopoulos, and Lotte Philipsen. But we also want to explore how the term is useful in relation to artistic practices. As we will learn, I think the term also originates in a kind of practical approach to digital art and culture. So this section addresses how the post-digital potentially may work as a framework for understanding this practice that relate, I think, to material conditions as well as history and nostalgia. This roundtable will include James Charlton, Søren Poll, Kieran Nolan, and Jamie Allen. And following these statements, we will also invite Christophe Bruno to come on stage to present his work, Psychoacademic Derive. And this work has been commissioned for our journal APRJA, a peer-reviewed journal about. So we're looking forward to seeing that too. So the process is a collaborative effort. It's a crazy endeavor to bring so many people on stage. It's kind of a reenactment of the newspaper. But in this sense, we're a bit sort of jokingly reflecting on the conditions of research, but we also hopefully divert from these jokes and playful attitude and try to get to more substantial statements and discussions around the post-digital and what it may signify. So with this, I'd like to welcome the first roundtable. And to begin the conversation, I think I will address your attention to our definition and also to sort of focus a little on what the post-digital means. So I'll read this out and then ask you to respond to it afterwards. See if I can find it. Post-digital, once understood as a critical reflection of digital aesthetic immaterialism, now describes the messy and paradoxical condition of art and media after digital technology revolutions. Post-digital neither recognizes the distinction between old and new media, nor ideological affirmation of the one or the other. It merges old and new, often applying network cultural experimentation to analog technologies, which it re-investigates and reuses. It tends to focus on the experiential rather than the conceptual. It looks for do-it-yourself agency outside totalitarian innovation ideology and for networking of big data capitalism. At the same time, it already has become commercialized. So that was our common definition. And now I'd like to include you and ask for your responses. And I think I'll leave the floor open, so whoever wants to start with. But but Florian has a tradition of beginning, starting at the workshop. It was always him who had a. So, yeah.
All right. I want to deepen our discussion of what is post-digital, and the simple answer indeed is it's a term that sucks, but is useful or might be useful. And now follows an attempt at a longer answer. And I must say that my own answer is really based on my own work as a teacher in an art and design academy, where I would say the skepticism or even distancing towards digital technology began long before Edward Snowden. So that it's not just about this, it's about more complex phenomena. One of them, I think most of us are familiar with, is a certain revival of old media, such as vinyl, audio cassettes, printmaking, handmade film, analog synthesizers, to name just a few, which have really been booming in the last couple of years. Then, well, if we go into the definition of post-digital, I think it's really important, and that was also a common sense that we had in our discussions, not to perceive it as a kind of historical periodization, and Geoff has written on that. So not understand it as a kind of historical or Hegelian break. First we were in the digital age, now we are in the post-digital age. But my suggestion was to rather understand it like post-punk or post-colonial, where you said, for example, post-colonial doesn't mean that colonialism is over, but it means that it has mutated into something else, and something else that still is a form of colonialism, but has materialized in different global power structures or cultural phenomena, such as, for example, here in Berlin, the refugee camp on Oranienplatz, which is also a post-colonial phenomenon. So maybe we can understand post-digital in a similar way, as a transformation and not as a kind of new historical period. Historically, if you go to the very first definition of post-digital, then we are in the year 2001, where the electronic musician composer Kim Cascone coined the term. And for him it was mostly, let's say, a critique of, let's say, the 1990s and still contemporary definition of digital as high-tech, as slick high-tech. And if you live in Germany, we just have a new minister for traffic and information technology, and he just said, you know, we have to basically build up the digital networking in this country to the speed of our highways. You know, that's the kind of critique that Kim Cascone voiced with post-digital, that said, I'm not interested in these kind of glossy innovation narratives. But then you also have the opposite. You have not the critique of digital as the kind of clean, sterile high-tech, but on the opposite, the critique of digital as kind of low-quality trash. So if you, for example, have vinyl lovers, they say, yeah, MP3 is trash, and we're listening to vinyl because we're against the digital trash, and you would have the same with graphic designers defending print against the web, etc., etc. Then, I should also add that the notion of digital that I'm presenting here is really based on the colloquial notion of digital, because, and I don't have the time to go into that. If you go into the actual scientific and technological definition of digital, then it is not at all connected to any specific technology or any specific medium. It's a way of information processing. But we have a colloquial notion where we say digital is anything that is electronic and somehow linked to computation. Let's stick with this just, let's say, for the sake of convenience, but let's say there are really some question marks if you would research that with information theory or media theory. Oh God, my time is up. Yeah. So then I wrap up. I would say, what do we actually see as post-digital phenomena? Hybridizations of old and new media. Often also the use of old media in ways that were earlier described as typical for so-called new media. For example, if you have zine-making festivals where people work like in hack labs or in book sprints. I didn't know this from zine-making culture in the 1980s, which was very different from that. And in general, a kind of paradigm shift from the whole kind of old versus new media paradigm. I mean, for people, let's say, who are 20 and were born in the 1990s, the whole notion of new media makes no whatsoever sense anymore. Also, the earlier definitions with Levmanovich and others, which located new media more in the area of, let's say, non-classical mass media, more let's say, community media, that has completely changed, especially in the perception of a younger generation, because new media or digital media for younger people is Google, Facebook, corporate login services. So the whole equation of old media, corporate, new media, community-based is no longer valid. And so we're shifting towards, and see that in artists and designers practice, a kind of dichotomy between DIY and corporate, which is no longer attached to either digital or non-digital.
Yeah, thank you, Florian. We could listen to you for a long time talking about this and this sort of shrink wrap agency and do-it-yourself. I think Annette perhaps you're sort of the second highest score in.
Perfect.
So you're.
I tried really hard to beat Florian, but it didn't work out. Yeah, 3 minutes is going to be difficult. Do we need a post-document? I'm looking actually in my research at the meaning of document and the value of documentation of net art. The kind of brief that I'm doing now is actually extracted from a sort of 20-page chapter, so bear with me, and I hope you, in the end, will understand what I'm getting at. So the word document derives from Latin and means to learn, show, and inform, as well as instruct and or teaching. And although we've lost this sense of documentum, the root of the word shows that the original Latin meaning was not just an object, but rather a testimony, an example, an instructive demonstration of some principle or idea. To understand contemporary media, Levmanovich, which was already named now, uses the term software performances instead of documents, because it's software which defines the options for navigating, editing, and sharing the document, rather than the document itself. The discussion of whether the term document is still useful in a digital age is brought up by many, and although there's not yet a real solution, it seems wise to return to the path of the earlier documentalists by focusing on defining a document in terms of function rather than physical format. So going down memory lane, it wasn't until the 19th century that the word document or documentation surfaced. The growing quantity of documents, the internalization and standardization processes around the late 19th century brought up the need to better define document and consider what was to be included and excluded. A group of documentalists coming from library studies made several attempts to broaden the concept of document that was still connected to writing, paper and books, and to also include other objects outside of the library. Notably in this respect are the writings by Paul Audley and Suzanne Breed. To stick with the latter, since 1924, as one of the first women, Breed worked as a professional librarian in the National Library in France. She focused on the nature of the document, breaking the trope of the book for documentation. Leaning on the work by linguistics and philosophers, Breed expanded the notion of the document, in particular to include any concrete or symbolic indexical sign. She recognized the abstractness and hence the possible inaccessibility of this definition by referring to the word indexical. She places the document in an organized and sort of meaningful relation with other material, really stressing the referential value of documents. In other words, documents are now examples of things, a grouping of things, which derive meaning from their context. Breed really emphasized that materiality is not a distinguishing characteristics anymore. However, not everything is automatically a document. Something only becomes a document when it's brought into public knowledge. It should unfold into social and cultural spaces. For example, a stone, or Breed's famous example of the antelope, only becomes a document once it's separated, made known to the rest of the world through articles, etc., and catalogued, after which it can be put on display and be studied as a document. The approach of the earlier documentalists is still valid today, but it would need to be redefined and clarified, because what happens when the context, for example, a distributed network, is also the work, as in the case with many net art projects? Can software and algorithms be considered as documents? Is something immaterial, a process or a network, a document? And if they're not, then what are they? In other words, is there something like a post-document? As I said, according to Manovich, we should talk about software performances instead of documents. But what does performance mean? I explored the dichotomy between fixed and fluid documents and concluded, like others, that digital documents are both, which leads to answering the question which aspects perform. The concept of performativity brought me to Austin's speech act theory, which I suggest to expand by connecting it to the concept of circulation, as discussed by Benjamin Lee and Edward Lipuma, thereby emphasizing the need to see the processes underlying as constitutive acts of the thing that you're looking at.
Yeah.
Can I just finish one more then? So if so, what I try to emphasize here, that the documents needs to, if we talk about documents, it needs to be stressed its function rather than its physical form or medium. This means that what something is has to be understood in terms of what it does, how it functions within and through machinic, systemic, social and cultural domains. As such, a document is still a document, even in the post-digital age.
That was a good finishing line, thanks. I'll leave it to Alessandro. I think you follow nicely from this.
Yeah, the definition I gave during the workshop was very, very short. It was actually that probably we can define post-digital when in a process involving digital technologies, cultural process. When these digital technologies are transforming the cultural object, when we strip out all the digital, what remains, we can call it post-digital. And it's just an hypothesis, and it stems from my own personal research about the relationship between traditional print and digital print, and what specifically very recently is starting to be created, which are what I called processual print, or better, hybrids, which are artistic printed objects. I'm talking about books and magazines, artist book and artist magazines, which embed digital processes. So the content they host in the classic form wouldn't be created without calculated digital processes, but they embed them in a traditional form. So the ideal hybrid object in these terms would be a printed object when you can't distinguish anymore where the analog process begins and ends, and when the digital process begins and ends. I would quote for in terms of transformation. And this kind of hybrid objects led me to a little bit of a provocative statement, because I'm researching this field also looking back at the past and how electronic technologies have transformed print during the last century or so, and how some of these technologies just stopped at some point, weren't able to be implemented in industrial processes. And so how the printed media specifically lost as we know it, and I started to speculate about that. So the provocative statement would be that we have considered, at least since the first big wave of the web, internet and the digital process and the digital technologies as a kind of a new medium. The medium which would have absorbed, I would say, digest all the other medium, including all of them. I'm starting to thinking in different terms, which are, what if the digital medium isn't a medium at all, but it's an agent? Historically, will be considered an agent that has been, by accident or on purpose, I don't know, it's an agent that is meant to transform every single medium in a different way. So it's not incorporating all the medium, it's not incorporating radio, video, audio, print, but it's a kind of maybe it's a wrong word, a virus that is transformed each of them, maintaining their own characteristics. So the post-digital would be the transition from what we used to consider, we used to know as the traditional medium into this, all those different medium after their infection with the digital technologies.
Thank you, Alessandro. I will now turn to Jeff.
Okay. I'm going to be quite brief, I think. I'm going to talk about the prefix post, not about the digital, but about just what happens when you put post in front of something. So in many ways, this seems like a rather unreconstructed position. I'm interested in what happens with post in front of a word, like digital, what it displaces. So an example would be, a classic example would be in a term like post-industrialism, that this displaces perhaps an important issue like class relations. So what happens when we say post-digital? What kind of description is this of a historical present? It seems to be a kind of conception of the present that's almost forgotten about history itself. This is, of course, the position of someone like Fredric Jameson in his critique of postmodernism. And he's drawing upon this periodizing logic, which, of course, could be seen as a rather Hegelian, but perhaps is useful to think about in terms of the way that the transformative potential of historical processes are somewhat displaced through these kinds of theories. The periodizing logic, it looks at transformations, in Jameson's case, of culture in relation to the developmental forces of production. This is a Marxist speaking, of course. So looking at the way that there are these waves of growth and stagnation, this seems highly relevant to this point in time in a moment of financial crisis. So I wonder, what is it about this connection between the post-digital and this present moment of crisis? Brian Holmes has written about this quite extensively recently in an essay called, actually I've forgotten. If you're interested, ask me later, I'll remember. But basically he's using this periodizing logic as well to unfold this idea of creative destruction in the way that capitalism kind of retools itself at points of crisis, the way it gets ready for the next wave of growth. So again, I wonder whether there's something about this post-digital condition which is speaking to this way of looking at things. So I suppose, in general, all I would say is, to pose this problem really of how to best describe this idea of an historical present. There's a lot of work around this, particularly using a term like contemporaneity, if you're familiar with this discourse. Okay, that's my simple contribution.
Thank you, Jeff. And Erik?
Okay, I'll also try to be quick. This was a very enjoyable experience going through this workshop these 3 days, and it was not so much maybe directly touching on what I'm trying to work through in my dissertation. So it was a lot of new stuff which I'm still digesting now. So I guess where should we start? I think for me it's a very radioactive, like Jeff is saying, but using the prefix post is very dangerous. I think we're all aware of that. But for me, it was more a kind of temporary tool. I don't see this as something to give to curators, or if they would like, they're welcome to, but it's more like a kind of wedge term. It's a moment in time. It's very temporal. It's a little bit like the afterglow thematic of kind of, let's just sit here and let it hover for a little bit and see what happens. That's how I've experienced using this concept, or this practice that others have shown us, will show us. It's also potentially a very bad meme, but useful still. So Jeff spoke about the prefix, so I won't talk so much about that. So just quickly, you might want to, if you're interested in kind of media art context, to look at in terms of the development. You might want to look at Post Media from Guattari, which is 80s and 90s, early 80s, late 80s, early 90s. He was even writing articles about this in Le Monde, as well as journals. Post Medium from Rosalind Krauss in 1999, in a book she wrote. You have Post Internet, later on by R.T. Vierkant and others in 2010. And you have, and I think in that there's an interesting kind of increase in scale. You go from Post Media to Post Medium, which is actually Krauss is kind of trying to collapse things in one level. And then you go up to the level of internet, and now we're going to digital. So there's maybe a kind of increase in scale, and so on. I think if you might want to also, I think it's been very useful for me to think about the post-digital. It allows me to think about the digital. What is the digital? I think the digital is very nebulous, metonymic, as Florian points out in his writing. This kind of part for the whole. How you gave the example in your article about the digital tripod. It just becomes kind of ubiquitous. This use of digitality and this way we think about digitality. If you do a Google image search for digital, you'll find a lot of blue images. So I fell down this little rabbit hole of studying the color blue, and color theory itself is very similar to, has lots of it's very confounding for the people who work on it, whether it's Wittgenstein or scientists. Yeah, I think I'll just leave some of these thoughts later and let other people speak about it and come back to it hopefully in discussion.
Thank you, Erik. We've already heard 5 positions on the post-digital. I feel like I'd really like this conversation and you to respond to each other. But on the other hand, we have so many people who are on. So I encourage all of us to keep these questions, and then hopefully I think we will have some time in the end where we can address them either as questions or as statements in response to each other. But obviously there are it's a messy concept, and there are some really some tensions between this colloquial meaning of the term and then there's also political significance of the term that I think we need to reflect upon. But thank you to all of you. And now I'd like to invite the participants in the next round table to come on stage. We have Lotte Philipsen, Josephine Bosman, Bodhidharma Chattopadhyay, and Georgios Papadopoulos. And you are, for the next 20 minutes, going to address what the post-digital mean in different contexts. And following our order of scores, high scores, low scores, we will begin with you, Lotte, and the microphone is just behind the laptop. So welcome to all of you, and welcome to Lotte.
Thank you, Christian. The reason why I was very surprised to learn that I gained a high score in the newspaper, because I didn't really sort of attempt to address all the key words that we were supposed to address. But Christian told me, it's because you write aesthetic all the time. And apparently that's one of the words that we were supposed to use. So it's pretty clear where I speak from, so to speak. I'm addressing the issue of aesthetics. And I find it fruitful to consider works of art in terms of aesthetics, to consider the works of art from a post-digital perspective, and not to consider works of art as post-digital in themselves. So I apply a perspective on the works rather than consider the works themselves as either digital or post-digital. To me, a post-digital perspective is a way of investigating, curating, or analyzing works of art, including works that somehow make use of digital technology, but also other works. And obviously, a post-digital perspective would not make much sense without a digital perspective. But these two perspectives are to be understood as different perspectives that exist simultaneously. So there are two different ways of considering works of art. So I need to just speak 1 minute or so about the digital perspective in order for me to explain what I mean by the post-digital perspective. To me, a digital perspective is sort of a technological perspective, which means that when you consider work from a digital perspective's point of view, you explicitly focus on the presence of digital technology in the work. From a digital perspective, it would be relevant to investigate what technological features in terms of software and hardware that make up the work, and how the artist has created the work by means of programming or hacking or etc. Therefore, a digital perspective is naturally interested only in works that actually makes use of digital technology. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a digital perspective. And you can also say that a digital perspective considers the work of art from the technological inside. In that sense, the digital perspective is a matter of poetics or a matter of an aesthetics of production. To apply then a post-digital perspective means, it doesn't mean, to me I find it fruitful to think of that perspective as a way to consider works of art from the outside, so to speak. Thus, a post-digital perspective is applicable to a broader range of works, since it is not concerned with the technological properties in the work. Instead, it enables us to focus on the aesthetic experience of the audience, or the viewer, or the user, or what we may call that person or persons. So a number of questions that are relevant from a post-digital perspective are, for instance, what role do the technical properties of a work play, if any at all, in aesthetic experience, if the technological properties are not visible or audible or sensible at all to the audience? So does it matter if you don't sense them, so to speak? And another question, or vice versa question, would be, how can imaginative digital technology in a work prompt aesthetic experience? For instance, what are the aesthetic effects of ideas or narratives on digital technology in specific works of art that happens to be solely analog in the medium? What if I consider a work of art that does not have any technological properties, or any digital technological properties in them, but it has a wall label that reads, "This is a computer that does weird stuff." What are then the relation between the narrative and the properties? So those are some of the questions that I think that a post-digital perspective opens up for.
Thank you, Lotte. Josephine?
Yes. In my work, I have tried to research art and the internet since about 15 to 20 years, and in this time I have come across issues, especially when trying to explain works of art to people in the contemporary art field. So my paper is very much about trying to bridge a gap between media art field and contemporary art field. And one way to do this is to try to break away from certain preconceptions that exist in the contemporary art field and the contemporary cultural theory field about the digital. And we've heard already a lot of criticism about the digital concepts of the digital that are limiting here in this panel. And the way I address it in my paper is by pointing out how several critics and also curators are talking about the digital in context of a screen-based or image-based culture. And the way I and many others in this room probably have experienced digital culture is completely different. It's a process-based culture. We experience the digital in art in a myriad of ways, rather than just something that is made to be viewed on a screen. So what I've tried to do as part of, I'm really at the beginning of writing my PhD, so I'm not going to be as precise and as clear as many of the other speakers, I think. But what I try to do is give a new perspective, an additional perspective to existing work in the field. And I try to add a perspective that is visual. So this is a bit contradictory, so I'm trying to move away from the screen, but still try to keep a visual perspective on this art. This is also because I think that if you look, for instance, at decentralized installations, network performance, if you look at code art, if you look at conceptual art in digital media, like post-internet art often is, objects that exist completely away from computers but are still post-digital or digital in some way, you need to be able to see the connection, and you need. I would like to somehow disclose this connection to see how it is formed. How much time do I have?
Well, you need to round up.
Okay, I need to round up. So I've found a sort of, how do you say this, similar thoughts in Rudolf Arnheim, who wrote about visual thinking, and he writes about how there's a way of seeing in science which describes things that are not visible. So you know that things are there, like for instance Galileo describes or investigated the shape of the universe with his mind's eye, as it were. This is also how I look at network installations, for example. I don't see a thing that stands here and then it dissolves into the great internet. No, I try to visualize how this work is connected to other spaces and how the data moves in between, how the connections move in between. And I see this as a sort of contemporary sculpture that stands in the internet. So my paper in this particular newspaper that we've made is a very short abstract of the things I want to explain. And so if you want to really understand or know what my research is about, maybe try to find a journal article later on.
Thank you, Josephine. Buddhaditya?
For me, post-digital works as a sort of loose coinage, which might work also as a kind of meta-concept which embraces or accommodates most of my artistic works, artistic imaginations and practice. I find that the breaking down of barriers between local and the global, it is almost past. So rather in the contemporary time, the interpenetration between the digital, the physical, and the mental, which I would like to underscore, the mental or psychic domain, in that particular confluence of digital, physical, and the mental, I find the concepts I'm developing, such as object disorientation of sound, hyper-listening, nomadic listening, they find themselves more comfortable. So the post-digital framework is very comfortable for my kind of artistic practice. So what I mean by post-digital is rather can be understood the way I describe the object disorientation of sound and hyper-listening. I think it's better to consult the final article which will be published in the journal online very soon, I guess. But very briefly, I would like to say that by object disorientation of sound, I mean the interpretation of sound. Because we know the concept sound object, which was described by Christian Metz, the phenomenologist, and also established by the work of Pierre Schaeffer, founder of Musique Concrète. And there, the recorded sound had a sort of semantic relationship to an object from which relates to the source. What I find in the so-called quote-unquote post-digital domain or post-digital condition, this objecthood of sound is further diluted because of its multiple recording, multiple interpretation, and its ebb and flow as data. So in this big data environment, sound is rather object disoriented. So that's my contention, and that's where I would like to invite you to go through the article, which is, I think, more elaborate in this discourse.
Thank you. Obviously, we are sort of addressing this post-digital, the experiential side versus, or perhaps the tensions between these experiences and what do we say, like the digital, or what the net used to be, what software art used to express. And I feel perhaps we're going to change gear a little now with you, Georgios. It's perhaps not going to be so much art related, but as you're going to include another aspect in this discussion. So, welcome.
Well, thank you, Christian. Thanks everybody for being here. Actually, it's going to be, unfortunately, quite a jump, because I'm going to talk more as an economist rather than an artist. But then again, economics is also a discourse that sucks, but it's also somehow useful. So in that sense, I think it's also interesting to think the post-digital from an economic point of view. And on the one hand, I would subscribe to the main statement that also Transmediale is trying to make, this idea that the revolution is over, or the digital revolution is over. And in economics, you can see that in terms of the maturation of, let's say, the industry around digital technologies. And we have two very prominent events that attest to that fact. On the one hand, we have the big dot-com crash in the early 2000s, when all this kind of speculation about the valuation of all these companies in the stock market somehow fluttered in the face of a wider financial crisis. But even more importantly, we had the flash crash of the 6th of May of 2010, where automatic trading somehow sparkled the biggest fall in the stock markets in the Great Depression. In a matter of a couple of hours, the Dow lost almost 500 base points. And of course, after a while, it really recovered. But these two events shows, on the one hand, the importance of digital technologies for our economy, but also the fact that the process of valuation of the digital technologies in the economic domain has somehow been stabilized. But what does that mean on a, let's say, on the day-to-day level, the individual user kind of perception of, let's say, digital economies? I think everybody is talking about this process of commercialization and monetization, the ubiquitousness of the paywall, the whole process of trying to monetize on digital culture, and the idea of cashless economies, or how money, let's say, intervenes in digital exchanges to signal economic value. And I think this is somehow the most prominent manifestation of this kind of the end of the digital revolution. Network technologies have been normalized, and now it's not about play and experiment, but it's about paying and consuming and also producing. And this is, I guess, the one side on how we could see this end of the digital revolution. The other side is also how critique or challenges somehow leave this kind of field of experimentation and playing around with the new digital technologies and trying to find ways to face this kind of normalization and establishment of the digital paradigm. And the easiest example from an economic point of view is the Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is interesting because it has this important ambivalence. There is this kind of peer-to-peer, decentralized, stateless currency, but at the same time has been one of the main vehicles of speculation. It somehow epitomizes the whole ideology of the neoliberal commercialization by these crazy fluctuations that you don't even see in the wildest days of the stock market. So exactly here I would like to stop and suggest that resistance practices or critique practices now, in this kind of phase of the afterglow, have exactly to face this challenge. On the one hand, you have to be critical, use the technologies to somehow, let's say, criticize or even short-circuit this process of commercialization, but at the same time, they are the locus where the most value is created, where speculation is even more rampant than in the most traditional manifestations of the stock market. And I would like to stop here. I think my 5 minutes are up.
Thank you, Georgios. So now we've had some statements on the value of the concept in different contexts, and to save sort of the debate, I can see some tensions in these statements here as well that could be interesting to explore, but save the discussion, and now I'll kick you off the stage and. And welcome the third round table. We have in this Søren Poll, James Charlton, Jamie Allen, and Kieran Nolan. And I think also to avoid kicking those people off stage afterwards, I'll also invite Christophe up. Christophe Bruno, who's presenting in there. Oh, David, you're here too. Well, we'll squeeze together, and the more the merrier. Yeah, we got a big couch. This will work. So, some statements that relate to how the post-digital also can be seen as a framework for practice and practice-based research, and how it frames notions of history and possibly nostalgia and materiality in the practice of the panelists that we have here. And I'd like to start with Søren, who gained the highest score.
Okay, so I'm going to speak quickly about post-digital practice as historical reflections on the contemporary situation. And it's from this paper that Christian and I co-wrote, where we look at the post-digital through some workshops. So whereas artistic experiments with old media like vinyl, records, cassette tapes, and chemical photography can easily be dismissed as sort of hipster nostalgia, we believe that it is at least also an attempt to explore historical and contemporary relations between technology and culture, including technological utopias, myths, and alternatives. So we've been conducting workshops with cassette tapes and old music media, together with a bigger group of colleagues, including Morten Riis, Andrew Pryor, Lone Kofod Hansen, and Sandra Boss. So there, at these workshops, we've experienced that there is actually a thorough interest across age groups, it's not only hipsters, in technology and how users and cultures are related to technology. And also how technologies can be reconfigured and reinterpreted culturally in a sort of a do-it-yourself practice. So these reconfigurations and do-it-yourself practices, reinterpretations of technology, they're often actually related to very personal and also collective, what you could call individuations and ways of creating active relations to technologies, but also aesthetics and art. You don't have to be an artist to have this sort of feeling that it was important when you first recorded your voice, for instance. So therefore, post-digital practice are more than nostalgia and related to such individuation processes with technology, materials, and aesthetics. In this way, it should also be seen as a critical investigation of alternatives to the sort of totalitarian interface we see today, the way they control access to the material, for instance, the iPhone, where you have a very limited access to the material and very limited ways of grappling it. So if the digital is no longer disruptive, if this is the post-digital condition, then we need explorations of past media to figure out ways of disrupting the current paradigm of cultural computing, the iPhone, for instance, the iPad, marked by controlled consumption. So we believe this is what happens, but we're also sure that the post-digital practices we see at these workshops, they will and perhaps are already getting reappropriated by the digital culture industry as just another app interface or a trendy innovation method. So concludingly, we're arguing for seeing the post-digital practices from a sort of complex historical perspective, avoiding a linear historicism, but also avoiding pure nostalgia or futurism. So it's a complex material, historical and contemporary perspective on where we are now. So it might suck, but hopefully it makes sense.
Thank you, Søren. James?
Thank you. I'm not going to attempt to summarize my research as such, but I will really talk about my practice, but I want to talk about the role of nostalgia, I suppose, in my practice. And I might reference a few things that people mentioned earlier in the day. As a digitally corrupted sculptor, I feel that perhaps I should apologize for harboring a post-digital longing for materiality, for the noise of the workshop and the heat of the furnace, and rather than the click of a mouse or the glow of the screen in my face. To be sure, post-digital longing is a desire to extract pixels from underneath my fingernails, to feel the viscerality of, sorry, wasn't I not up there enough? Feel the viscerality of the material in a way not satisfied by haptic interfaces. But this nostalgia, if that's what it is more deeply rooted in an embodied understanding of materiality that is somehow swept away in the special effects of digital media. My nostalgia then is a rejection of mimesis and a search for the digital without the media. And Florian talked earlier about the colloquial definitions of the digital, and Christoph suggested the digital was a virus not constrained by technology. It's in these terms that I'm casting the digital. And this is possibly in contrast with Lottie's sort of tethering of the digital to the technological, which is something that my iPad has just rejected. So as a result, I find myself rejecting notions of materiality based on physicality, approaching it instead as a state in which objects and bodies are extended beyond themselves to co-constitute digital materiality. But the post-digital is also nostalgic for me in that it draws me back to a time to reclaim seminal sculptural practices as fundamentally digital practices. I speak here of a rethinking of materiality of the 1960s ultra-conceptual artists. This retro-projection suggests that it is not necessary to think chronologically from the past to the present, but rather we can look backwards from the present to the past, and in so doing, discover things that we missed the first time through. In this way, we might even reread the pre-digital as post-digital. Here I feel like it should be possible to make a connection with Jeff's discussion of sort of the prefix of post. I haven't quite got that clear in my head yet, but the nostalgia of the post-digital then is the occurrence of the present with the concurrence of the present with the past. The realization that the happenings of the 60s, for example, are in fact post-digital in nature, even though they chronologically precede the digital. So, wake up and taste the terabytes. In our nostalgic post-digital afterglow, the fallacy of the digital era has been exposed as we realize that we have always been post-digital.
Thank you, James. Now we have Kieran. No, well, exactly. What's that? You got a higher score, Jamie. Yeah, it's you. So you get.
Do we have to do it like that? Yeah. So I think David and I were just here to make a few comments from the kind of artistic practice side, I suppose. Although that's kind of the problematic that is so nice to be involved here because in a sense this is a community of people looking at post-digital research, and so Often when we speak about the project that we have in the foyer here, critical infrastructure, we try to identify it as not necessarily an artistic endeavor, actually. It's a little bit more operational as a research observatory or some kind of presencing, to invent a word, of data. And so the concern, I think, for us somehow is not just what the post-digital looks like, but what does post-digital research manifest itself as. And so in the little thing we wrote for the newspaper there's sort of mention of kind of trying to be outside of discipline, anti-discipline, non-discipline sort of practices that may or may not manifest itself as things that look sort of like art. So that's just one comment, and I guess I thank you for involving us in the workshop and today. From that's sort of outside of from within the project and the ideas that it's trying to bring out. I think it's probably obvious that we're working in a kind of mode of at least an interest of materiality and kind of moving towards the layers beneath, as it were, as opposed to the temporal nature of post. Trying to figure out what it is that those obviously temporal processes are leaving behind and beneath everything that allows us to do artistic practice as technology-based artists, I suppose, or technology-based art researchers. And I think that's kind of there was a great discussion yesterday with Baruch Gottlieb and Aaron LaCour in the foyer there, where Baruch quoted a poem, a John Cage poem, where at the end I think it ends with the ground around, the ground around. And I just think that's a really nice sort of summary of what it is that we were trying to figure a way of showing about the festival, about digital culture, about the layers of institution that kind of allow these kinds of practices. There's a lot more I could say about sort of measurement and the way that like the way Alessandro was bringing up this kind of digital as a virus and the problematics of post and whether or not there's a new era or whatever. Because obviously when we start to bring in things like surveying equipment, which is like, the joke is it's the second oldest profession, is that obviously you start to realize when you hang out with guys that do surveying that, the problematics of like measurement and quantification and all this sort of accuracy have been around for a very long time. So the digital has always indeed been there. I don't know if David wants to say something.
30 seconds. So in some ways what Jamie was talking about, that our response to the post-digital was the infra-digital. So look less about temporalities, but more as cross-sections. And that's what we're trying to present here. And it ties back to science, to materialities, to non-materialities, and things like that. So we try not really to differentiate if it's material practices or not. And although they all relate together, and yesterday we had a good discussion with Erin about intermediality. If we go back to the vinyls, the cassette tape, but in the 1960s, Fluxus was doing the same with art. So they kind of deconstructed what was in the gallery and they brought intermedia. And her critique was that if we do that, we're trying to go back to the museum. And so if new media was a bit lost, we go back to using materials so we can be recognized. So she had a pretty good critique about transmedia media and the fact that kids are going back to more physical manifestation of the digital or media because they want to be recognized by old art institutions. So that was quite interesting. That was just a comment, but...
Thank you, David. Kieran, you're on next.
Okay, it's kind of funny that the video game guy gets the lowest score, but there was no alien shooting involved in the paper write-up process, but that's okay. So yeah, where I'm coming from for this is I'm working on a sort of practice-included piece of research where I'm looking at the video game interface from a number of angles, connectivity-wise and aesthetic-wise. And what I'm doing is I'm looking in particular at the arcade video game interface, the old arcade cabinets that we're familiar with and are kind of over time disappearing from public use as video gaming at home has become more and more popular. So with that type of digital media, there's a definite physical aspect to it. And, we're talking about the post-digital as this stage when, the digital world and the analog world, they're both becoming you know, fairly equal to each other. We're not really fazed by the digital anymore. It's not a big deal. So, and it's very much embedded into our everyday environment and this plane. But at the same time, while it's sort of on equal status, there's still a divide there. They're not quite the same at the same time. There's a division of resolution there. You know, when we connect with a piece of digital media, our actions, you know, are downsampled when we connect with it, and what we immerse ourselves into, it's also at a lower resolution. So, you know, we talk about post-digital, but I'm kind of wondering as well about kind of veteran digital platforms and what becomes of them. You know, what are the post versions of those? So, in software studies and platform studies, you have the use of emulation, where you know you can recreate a platform as a program within another platform. So basically, a computer in a computer. And where this applies to my topic is, you know, if you want to emulate an arcade game, you can do so. You can use an emulator called MAME. You can load the code onto a virtual representation of an arcade machine. You can experience this through your computer, but you're constrained by the computer itself also. So, you know, in the original setting, you have the environment that you're surrounded by, and you also have the actual physicality of the machine. When you play it at home, you might get the same features on screen. You can apply a scanline filter, you can apply a C or a cathode ray tube type curve to it, but you're still playing it, you know, in a constrained form, sitting at your desk on a home computer. This has been, you know, addressed through people building their own physical cabinets in which to in which to house these. But what I'm looking at is actually building a digital shell for the emulator so that you can experience recreations of these cabinets in a 3D space. So, you know, it's kind of using a flavor of the month peripheral, the Oculus Rift, and the idea, if I basically describe what it looks like, is you walk up to a very basic podium with a square on the ground, sort of like a crime scene outline, which represents the machine that's not there in the physical space, but when you put on your headphones and you put on your visor, you'll see the actual machine in front of you in 1:1 scale. So it's attempting to become a bit closer to the actual original digital experience, which is grounded in the real world, but truly or purely through digital means. It's not perfect, it's just a prototype idea, but that's kind of the purpose of the piece too. It's to see how people experience this and what they think of it. A couple of concluding remarks. There's going to be a couple of different views, depending on people's own context. So again, talking about nostalgia, if somebody has played the original arcade game in the physical real world and they played the emulation, their own memory of it is going to colorize what they see, and they're going to have a different interpretation of it, perhaps a more forgiving interpretation than somebody who is brand new to this. And for somebody who's brand new to this experience, what they're probably going to accept at face value what they get, flaws and all. So you can recreate it, but it's going to, you know, it's just going to differ depending on a person's own background information. And when you add all these extra physical, gestural type of operations to interacting with something, it becomes more awkward. I mean, like if you use a command line interface, it's much quicker than if you have to point and click with a GUI. But we can put up with these hindrances, these rituals, just to make things easier. But also, in the case of perhaps an arcade game where you're spending more time, setting it up and operating it, we'll put up with that for authenticity. But that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kieran. Now, you can please stay on stage to avoid these shifts. But Christophe is now going to present his psychoacademic derive. I think this will work somehow also. The title indicates this derive of the panel itself, perhaps. You are welcome to plug in.
Oh, this one maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, you want to stick? Yeah.
This derive of the panel itself, perhaps, is articulated in Christophe's work as well. But well, just to reflect a little on what has been going on so far, I think we've seen a lot of tensions, not a uniform expression of what the post-digital mean, but perhaps also a lot of discrepancies and tensions. At least I can spot the tension between the colloquial, messy understanding of the post-digital that's also reflected in the practices, and also and the theoretical, critical, also curatorial approaches to the notion. Also, there seems to me some kind of tension between these sort of hybrid documents, also hybrids as some kind of solution way in the contemporary, but also already part of a process of capitalization that, for instance, the story of the Bitcoin perhaps shows us, as Georgia said. There's a tension between the digital perhaps moving out of the realm of festivals like this and into a broader realm of art history. And then there's the research itself, tensions between or return to material, the ground of research, the meeting between researchers versus the administration of and management of research, from the anti-discipline to the administration of disciplines. And I think that's also what the psychoacademic derive somehow addresses, but now... Oh, you need to be online. I'm sorry for this. Oh, here we go. Yeah, Christophe, you have a lengthier presentation, 20 minutes. And after that, we'll open up for questions.
Sorry. What? What was... I don't know why I have to talk more than the others, but... So, sorry. My name is Christophe Bruno. Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm going to present you a project which is called Psychoacademic Derive. Derive is drift. And the project is supported by the Disruptive Innovation Dark from Aarhus University. So thank you very much. I hope you will not regret it. And so maybe I'm gonna, so this is a really starting project. So it's always difficult to present a project with this pre-conception phase. I'm going to explain it very briefly, and then I'm going to talk more about problems I have with this project. But maybe first, I'm going to present very, very shortly who I am, because this is important for the project. I've been working in the media art field since 2001. But before that, I come from a completely different world. I was trained as a physicist, theoretical physicist, and I did a PhD in theoretical physics in the late 90s. And so I was trained as an academic guy. And I was really bored with the academic world. And after 2 or 3 years of research, I decided to become an artist and to leave the academic world. And I didn't become an artist right away. It was in the bubble, internet bubble burst, so I created some web agency and blah, blah, blah. And then in 2001, I don't know how, well, I know how, I'm going to explain, but I became an artist. And that's very important for the project, because I became an artist in one night. And this is, so when I tell you the Psychoacademic Derive is a new project, in fact, it's not a new project. I started it something like 15 or 20 years ago, but I just didn't know it. The drift, the derive started when I was studying physics. And so I'm not going to talk about post-digital, or maybe a bit, but we'll see that. So the way I became an artist, it's really the way viruses and memes and all this stuff, these things you know, which happen on the networks. So you have a very, very slow progression for years and decades. Nothing is happening, and suddenly you have a burst, you know, and then everything changes. You have a very, very violent burst. And I'm telling this because I really lived that burst for me, for my personal network. So in one day, the whole network I was living in started to call me an artist. And since then, I arrived on a plateau, and I'm an artist. And I'm asking myself, why am I an artist? Why am I? And I know I'm find being an artist is boring, just as before I was feeling academy is boring and blah, blah, blah. So for years, for 20 years maybe, I was looking at the artistic world from the academic world, and now I'm an artist. And I want to look at the academic world back from the art world. So that's the idea of the psychoacademic academic derive, okay? Well, not the idea, that's a starting point. So this is an old project. The first project I did, one of the first projects with which I became an artist in one night. I made a Google hack, buying keywords. I'm not going to explain this. Buying words on Google, and I realized there was some strange connection between money and language. So this was already, I guess, post-digital stuff. And it's post-digital because you take the digital world, internet world, you take Google, you make some performance, and then you realize there is a connection between two of the oldest media we can imagine, language and money. And then if you take back the digital, you are left with this very strange connection. It has nothing to do with digital. Still, without digital, we could not realize this, that there is an explicit and strange and crazy connection between money and language. So when I did this, I was not an artist, and the night I did this, the day after, everybody was calling me an artist and starting to exhibit in the small world, of course, of new media. It was very small at that time. So now let me explain you the project in a few sentences. So this is a derive, the psychogeographic situationist derive by Guy Debord. So you have to browse the city by listening to your emotions. The project I want to do is just going out the geographic space and going to the conceptual or academic space and doing the derive again. But of course, it's a bit different. It's more complex. So this is a map I found. It's 2008 from two researchers, Roswall and Bergström from Sweden. And it's everybody, I mean, it's quite common, this kind of stuff. You take a citation between academic articles, and you map them, and you get some scale-free graph, you know, with a big domination from molecular cell biology. If you do the same on the web, here you will have Google and Facebook and so on. And here you have a sociology, and you can zoom here, and you have somewhere, you have a political science, economics, psychology, psychiatry, and so on. You can map this. So the idea of the psychoacademic derive is quite simple. I'm going to try to make weak ties between the big clusters. Because, as you know, information goes mainly through weak ties on the network. So very improbable gray region where nothing seems to happen. For instance, for years I was a weak tie between the academic world and the artistic world. And suddenly, all the information goes through this small, improbable, weak tie, and then it grows, and then the whole network is rewired, reconfigured. Okay, that's the idea. And you have many examples in history. For instance, you know this, Little Green Man. In one day, Little Green Man in 1955. The day before, nobody knew what it was. And the day after, the family got visited by extraterrestrials. The whole United States knew about Little Green Man. It's the same about ready-made. It's even more interesting. Ready-made for decades. The idea of ready-made was just, you know, completely invisible. And then at some point, so Duchamp went to the States, and in the 50s or 60s, with the burst of contemporary art, ready-made became a meme, a virus. So it's always the same stuff, okay? You know this. But this is really the idea of the derive. So I'm going to what I'm going to do is that what I'm doing now, not now, but last night and blah, blah. I'm writing academic articles, okay? Not really hoax, real academic articles, mixing these different domains. That's very simple, actually, but it's really hard to write them, of course, because I'm not a specialist of anything, so I have to work very hard to write them. I don't want to make pure hoax. I want to make real, plausible articles, and then I'm going to publish them and to measure the eventual rise or not. Probably nothing will happen, we'll see, but or maybe it will happen in 50 or 60 years, because I'm very much interested in a long scale of time, of course, as I'm going to show. And we talk about, I think Geoff talked about Kondratiev waves, and you have big waves in history, which are about 50 or 60 years. And this is what I'm really interested in, these big time scales, not really the short ones. So the project is going to take quite some time. And sorry, I have to drink. So the first, how much time do I have?
We have, it's 1 o'clock now. We have
10
minutes.
Okay. So the first hoax is something which was quite known in 1994. Some guy named Alan Sokal and Bricmont made a hoax, and they managed to publish, maybe you remember this, they managed to publish a completely fake article in Postmodern Studies. I don't remember exactly, but if you read this now, it looks really, I mean, it's not surprising anymore, this kind of stuff. Transgressing the boundaries towards the transformative hermeneutics of quantum gravity. It could be the title of a talk here. So here are some examples of psychoacademic derivative articles I'm writing. I'm not going to explain, just telling you. So this one here is a weak link between art history, media archaeology, and microbiology. A case of self-preservation of a parasitic artwork with subprotrophic nutrition. But it's true. I mean, it looks crazy, but I'm really writing it as if I was really, I'm really involved in that matter. And of course, I have to know a lot of things in my microbiology. I have to meet people in microbiology and people in media archaeology. By the way, I'm teaching media archaeology in the Avignon Fine Arts School now, so it's easier, and blah, blah, blah. Semantic capitalism and the tragedy of the commons. Information horizon and the post-digital shift between hardware and software. I like this one, class struggle and the Barbara Streisand effect. Conceptual ornithology. So this one is nice because it involves alchemy, art history, linguistics, ornithology, of course. The art sphere as an excitable social medium. The World Wide Web as a pure a priori form of intuition, which will be a bit harder to write. And so on. The decay of the aura of the aura. Oh no, this one. Bow-tie structure of the network and Lacanian topology, which is my favorite. So maybe I shouldn't tell you this because it has to be somehow secret, but anyway. So here are the tools. So I use really, as I'm a former physicist, I know the tools I have to use, which are really complex network tools, like scale-free networks and phase transitions and kind of topology, mathematical, alluvial diagrams I'm going to show you, but just technical details. And data, they come from many things. Google Scholar, Thomson Reuters, Wikipedia, Google, Facebook, Twitter. I've been working on different hacks for 10 years now on Google, on Facebook, so I know a bit about this, how to hack these things. Okay, so I'm really going very slow. I'm going to explain you what I did in the past 5 years in 2 minutes. So I call this conceptual art without any ideas. The idea is that before that, I was doing installation and performances, and I noticed that all my work was reappropriated by the corporate and the contemporary art world, and as you know. So I decided to stop making new artworks and try to understand how concepts were flowing on this big map of where all the concepts would be. I mean, imagine a map of all concepts and of all art. You have to imagine this. And I wanted to draw the trajectory of my concept, trajectory of my works, because I was losing the paternity of my works, so I still wanted to live how they would evolve without me, and try to draw waves and cycles, and this is the origin of this thing. So this is a project called Dadameter, where we mapped the whole language using hacking Google. And here, so this is a map of language as a relational medium. So everything is here. Everything you can think of is here. Okay? And here you have the wasteland and the mainstream and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to explain, but what I was interested in is how concept would rise in the wasteland and then would be exported in the mainstream. Even sometimes I was following the flow, the stream, but most of the time I was just staying in the mainstream. And then I've been working on a project called Artware, based on cycles, hype cycles like this. I'm not going to explain, I don't have time. But we made we worked a lot to put waves on this map, if you want, trying to see how could we. This map was a screenshot of language. I want to have waves and kind of meteor of language and concept. So this was the Artware project. And this is something which is even more interesting, which I didn't do. It's the same guy who mapped the academic world. This is called alluvial diagram. This is very interesting because here, for instance, you can see how neurology and molecular cell biology merge together. That's really, really, really interesting. Maybe I can show you some page here. This is really very nice network theory. And imagine this is a rewiring of networks. You have two communities. At some point, you have a weak link, and then information flows very rapidly, and then the two communities change their hardware. Okay, communities hardware, and what is flowing is software. So you have a very deep hardware-software relation, and when it rewires, you get an alluvial diagram like this. So that's really, really interesting way to represent things. Of course, it's only representation. It's not performative here. What else? Sorry. Oh, this is a painting by some guy, an American painter, called Ward Shelley. This one is called Who Invented the Avant-Garde. He do it by hand. And this is alluvial diagrams for art history. This is completely amazing. I didn't know, I discovered him maybe 1 or 2 years ago. And you have many, many maps which look like alluvial diagram of a kind of a book of art history. This guy is called Ward Shelley. And it's absolutely fascinating. So this is what I would like to do as a next step. Okay. But by using this big structure like Facebook and Google Scholar, I want to do it with a kind of automation. I can do it by, he does it by hand. I want to have some kind of automation. And let me see, okay. I think I have to stop somehow. I'm just going to tell you what I was fighting with in the last few weeks, because there are big questions behind this. There is a question of performativity. I'm doing all this. At the beginning, I was doing all this because I wanted to, in 2007, when I did the Dadameter, I wanted to somehow make a critical piece about big data, which at that time they weren't called big data. But so I wanted to use the big data capitalistic tools and hack them and try to make something else. And at the end, what I realized is that it's almost impossible. You hack something and then you are hacked in return. And what you do is even more, what I was doing was even more pessimistic. I was trying to find a way to maintain some kind of utopia and creativity, and I couldn't. All the time I was, this big circle on the map. The fact that this big circle of capitalistic discourse is ever and ever and ever again was always more and more obvious to me. So it was always very pessimistic. So yeah, there are many questions. There are questions about performativity, predictability. I don't have time to talk about that. Unpredictability and discontinuity in history. So just to show you these are the Kondratiev waves Jeff was talking about. And we were here. So Duchamp made his first ready-made in 1913. And then he was really invisible here. But it was not invisible because there was no data. It was invisible because there were no captation, there was no brain, no recording device who was capable of looking at this piece. It's not a matter of quantity. And then at some point there is probably one big discontinuity here. And there was another one here in the 50s, 60s with the rise of contemporary art. And then the ready-made suddenly burst here, like this. And now we are, but it's not a matter of quantity, okay? That's very important. And now we are somewhere here. So here, this is the moment where capitalism is resourcing itself. And of course, the digital world is a way for capitalism to resource. So when we believe we have a utopia, so utopia are here, 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 and dystopia is here in history. But capitalism burst is exactly at the same moment. So that's a very big problem to understand this. And the last two things, and I'm going to finish. So a question of reappropriation I talk about. And then the last question is about the very idea at the beginning, going from geographic to conceptual space. And here I'm just going to show you a diagram by Stendhal. You know, Stendhal invented these crazy things like double crystallization of love, and also Stendhal syndrome. Well, he didn't invent it. He lived it. You know, he was at Santa Croce Chapel, and he saw a painting. I don't know which one, and then he became completely crazy. He had to go out of the chapel. And this is a drawing of his past. And here is Virginie Kubly, the object of his love, and he's just drawing past, showing that he cannot approach his object of love. This is amazing. So I'm showing this to you because even in representation, there is some trace of emotion and performance. Not in the shape, maybe, but in some hole that you may perceive in the representation. And finally, this is something I found on the internet. So this is the hype curve of love. Usually the hype curve is something which is used in new technology, you know, the cycle of life of technological objects. And some guy did this. I thought it was great to show this, to end the talk. And you have, of course, utopian phase. And, you know, this is, by the way, this is the two crystallization phases of Stendhal, if you have read De l'Amour. So here's your object of love is completely idealized, and then problems arise here, and then you have to make a choice, you know. Either you enter in the reproducibility phase. It's exactly the same thing as the hype cycle. Here you have a peak of visibility and immaterial phase, and here you have the plateau of implementation, and where everything is normalized and reproducible, okay? So it's not. So I don't think it's a very optimistic end anyway. But that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. I hope you also think of this as a uniform presentation, even though they consist of individual presentations. But now we'd like to open the floor and invite respondents to the panel and between the panelists. And I think this ending of perhaps sort of the afterglow of of the digital and expressed as a hype curve of love that is declining in the winter, could be a place to start. But please respond. Yeah.
I guess just a small point to kick off. And somehow that was also very much sparked by Christophe's great presentation. Thanks a lot for that. And for me, it's kind of a realization throughout the whole festival. We talk about this radical break, the post-digital, the afterglow, but we still use the same concepts, right? Capitalism, language. And in some ways, I think, when we talk about language today, it doesn't mean the same that it meant 50 years ago. So somehow I think that maybe also change of vocabulary is in order now. We have to find new words or redefine old concepts. And I guess also this kind of discussion about what is post-digital and at the same time what is digital tries to do, but still we are somehow enfolded in the same kind of discourse that we try to suppress. And this is, in philosophy, there is this funny idea of this ship that floats, but during the floating we build the ship because the ship is not ready. So I think somehow this is kind of a kickoff to, let's say, rethink also other words and maybe rethink our practices using new concepts.
May I respond to this? I think this is, what you're describing is exactly, let's say, the risk or even the danger of the term post-digital, because it seems to suggest that we are living in a post-digital society where, let's say, these systems such as stock market trading systems, capitalist acceleration, etc., are over. Well, that's not the case. In fact, they are as virulent and as powerful as never before. So if you use a very simple example, let's say if you would have literally plugged out the internet 15 years ago, probably not much really grave would have happened. If you would totally switch off the internet in Europe, we would have a complete collapse of industrial infrastructures at this point, because we have been so dependent on this technology. I mean, nothing would work. Even the logistics of a supermarket wouldn't work without this technology anymore. So it's absolutely not the case that post-digital means that the technology is not relevant anymore, or that it is not something that is even an urgency to develop a critical discourse on, and also a critical artistic reflection on. It's just, let's say, that there has maybe the reflection and the response must not be limited to a certain media studies or media art ghetto, point one, and that's already happening, we're seeing that. And point two, that people have to choose more clearly the site which they are on. So again, if I would go back to Transmediale 10 years ago, it always has been a critical festival. It never has been a hype festival of, let's say, Silicon Valley ideology, but sometimes it didn't really clearly choose its lines, and you would also have some cyber optimistic presentation by some stupid ZKM project, and just to be nice to your friends in the media art scene. And this is maybe something where a term like post-digital can express a kind of more critical attitude, but it doesn't mean that we're living in a post-digital age. Quite the opposite.
I got here a bit late, so I won't try to ask too much, but I just wanted to add a new term, post-digital colonialism.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. It's been really very, very stimulating. It's just that I have this question that you might find perhaps slightly provoking, perhaps not. It's actually, don't you think that at least ever since electricity, or not to exaggerate that much, at least since Gilbert Simondon or McLuhan or Kittler, since we are in Germany, or since conceptual art and Marcel Duchamp, so avant-garde modern artists, haven't it always been what you define as post-digital, their way of thinking? Like capturing the operations, what it does, without ever, I mean, I cannot think of myself ever saying, ever believing that offline and online is not the same thing, or thinking that old media and new media are not the same thing. So, yeah, just that, and perhaps, I don't know, I would like you to answer, but since you've already spoken, I would go for everybody. Anybody.
I think there have been a number of presentations here that say exactly the same thing. So I would just say you get it completely, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me that you have to look at the underlying qualities that we're talking about and get rid of all the subject. And and I use this word, structural method, for looking at what it is that constitutes this thing that we're talking about, all these things. And that makes it transferable, that it's not locked into disciplinarity in any way, it's not locked into histories in any way, it's a transportable mode of operating. So yeah, I agree with you, I guess.
What I find really quite peculiar and interesting to think about is that we had the dot-com crash, and now we have the afterglow. It's kind of strange steps to come, you know. So first it crashed and died, and suddenly there's an afterglow. So what happened in between? So maybe that's why we're discussing it. You know, somehow this dot-com crash was not real. It was just a stock market thing. The digital technologies kept evolving and kept developing at the same pace, really. But we didn't, our understanding of it, at least in the mainstream culture, the mainstream media, the understanding of what digital is and what digital culture is has not evolved. And I think that is what we're trying to address.
That's similar to the point I was going to make. You know, this issue of what does it tell us about now? What does it tell us about the historical present? Okay, there's some similarities, but there are also some very particular conditions that we need to understand better, and maybe this is a little bit useful in that endeavor.
Yeah, to me, I think it addresses some turning points. One being, you know, into the technological history that now use you know, you've got, you know, machines like you know, the iPad, the iPhone, or e-books, or, you know, numerous, which have sort of built on, you know, culture or cultural content. So even though, for instance, you know, as Florian says, Transmediale has always been a critical festival, we also kind of in the game and part of this, and there's even ways that this technology turns back to sort of the military origins of technology, of course, with the Snowden NSA kind of thing. So there are some really important turning points, and cultural content, cultural production. You could argue that in some ways, say the iPad has taken software culture and stripped it of its newness and integrated it in the App Store, right? So in that way, so where does it leave us? Maybe it leaves us fumbling with cassette tapes, and that's happening. And there is a broad interest for these kind of things. It's not only hipsters, as I argued. So this is this very sort of complex situation we're in the midst of. And of course there are relations to, say, Duchamp or whatever, early print. But yeah, so we're in this, you know, it's not epochal, but it's definitely something that's out there, and definitely also something I believe is pointing forward without sort of thoroughly knowing, you know, how does it point forward.
I want to add, I think if you take this kind of Duchampian impulse in modern art, then you could argue it had two aspects and maybe also went two ways. The one was, let's say, what you nowadays call in contemporary art institutional critique. Yeah? So a kind of reflection of the, let's say, production and environment and also social and aesthetic conditions of art, which it subverted, for example, by putting a pissoir into the museum as a sculpture. And on the other hand, also maybe beyond that institutional critique of the art system in particular, a general reflection of systems, of how politics of institutions work, way beyond the art system. And personally, it seems to me, and maybe I'm simplifying, that a lot of what has subsequently developed as institutional critique in contemporary art, and also as so-called relational aesthetics, has been too single-mindedly focused on the art system. You know, it has a little bit lost the bigger picture. Not always. Yeah? I mean, for example, if you look at an artist like Trevor Paglen, who is here at this festival, has been here at this festival actually now for the second time. He was here already 3 or 4 years ago, but now is really established as a contemporary artist also outside this kind of system. That it's not always like this, but let's say for the mainstream of relational and institutional critique art, I really see a kind of self-obsession with the art system and a partial incapability to think the bigger picture. And this is why I think if we say yes, something like post-digital totally connects to the Duchampian impulse, then you also have to put in that relativization that in a way that the Duchampian impulse has been taken up, has also kind of impoverished or simplified that impulse up to the point where you can live, I'm saying that somebody who's a teacher at an art school, where you can live a kind of parallel life in the art system, you know, where everything you can eat art food, you can sleep in an art hotel, you can listen to music that comes out of the contemporary art system, etc. And that can be interesting as a social experiment, but often it is very limited and not just thinking of it as a kind of alternative space. And then lacking the kind of reflection of what actually the mechanics of today's military industrial production. Yeah? And this is, I think, and whether you call it post-digital or something else, I think is really not important. And post-digital is perhaps more perspective that comes from the kind of media studies approach. And maybe we have to find a better term.
Is there one more question? Otherwise, I'd like to. The time is running out, and we need to wrap up. But just as a concluding remark and sort of meta perspective on these kinds of workshops that we are doing, is that the real point of them is also to build networks. I mean, this kind of or research aspects have always been part of media festivals. In that sense, we have always taken, you know, a term that has a colloquial meaning, like the post-digital, that's part of digital culture, and then turned it into some kind of academic concept, some kind of academization. And this is, of course, only natural. That's how we as a research area exist, but we also very much only exist here in these closed networks. And one of the aims of these workshops is also to open this up and to invite this kind of research to be inclusive to young emerging researchers, and we have seen many of them here, and also to somehow formalize it a little with meaningful peer review systems that are, of course, also experimental. And I hope you have enjoyed this. And you can follow our work also online on our website, APRJ, a peer-reviewed journal about all the acronyms from a peer-reviewed journal about a terrible name. Is there a link on the Transmediale website? From the, yeah. And it's also in the newspaper as well. It's explained, and you can read more about our conceptual thinking of what it means to bring researchers together and why we think this is a really important endeavor. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you to all the panelists.